3 very scariest. Alone travel at night horror stories. Fenna had always found something oddly calming about walking alone at night. There was a strange kind of peace in the stillness, in the way the world seemed to shrink down to just her footsteps and the rhythmic sound of her breathing. But tonight felt different. The air was heavier, the darkness pressed closer, and the silence, usually so comforting, felt unnatural. She was heading home from the small convenience store a few blocks away, a plastic bag swinging lightly in her grip. The quickest way back was through the old park, a path she had taken countless times before. It was faster, quieter, and usually she did not mind the eerie glow of the lone street lamp flickering above the worn pavement. But as she stepped onto the narrow path, a strange sensation crawled up her spine, a feeling she could not explain. She was being watched. Fenna's grip on the bag tightened. Her pace quickened, her boots clicking against the pavement. She tried to shake off the feeling, to convince herself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. But then, footsteps. Software slow, following. She stopped. The sound stopped too. Her breath hitched as she turned, scanning the path behind her. The park stretched back into shadows, empty, motionless, nothing. A shaky exhale escaped her lips. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe the wind had rustled the leaves just right, or maybe the sound of her own footsteps had echoed in a way she was not used to. Still, she could not ignore the tight knot forming in her stomach. She kept walking. The footsteps returned. Fenna swallowed hard. This time she did not stop. She kept her eyes forward, her stride steady. But she could hear it, the deliberate steps, the faint dragging sound that followed each one. It was not an echo. It was not her imagination. Someone was behind her. Her heartbeat pounded against her ribs as she reached the end of the park, stepping onto the main road where the glow of the convenience store spilled onto the pavement. Relief washed over her as she hurried inside, the cool fluorescent lights buzzing above her. Safe. For now. The cashier barely looked up from his phone as she wandered the aisles, forcing herself to take slow, steady breaths. It was fine. There was no one following her. She had let her mind get the best of her. That was all. By the time she paid for her things and stepped back outside, she had convinced herself she had been overreacting. The street was quiet, but not in a threatening way. Just empty. Still, when she reached the entrance of the park, she hesitated. The shortcut suddenly felt like a terrible idea. She glanced at the longer route. It would take her at least 15 extra minutes. But she was tired. She wanted to be home. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the path. The flickering street lamp buzzed above her. The air was thick. Too still. She moved faster, her footsteps sharp against the pavement. Then, a whisper, right behind her ear. "Do not run." Fenna's blood turned to ice. She did not think. She did not look. She ran. Her legs burned as she sprinted down the path, her breath coming in panicked gasps. The plastic bag in her grip tore, spilling its contents onto the ground. But she did not stop. Something was behind her. She could feel it. Too close. Too real. The exit. Almost there. Almost. A hand grabbed her wrist. Cold. Too cold. Fenna screamed. She twisted, yanked her arm free, stumbling forward. She did not look back. She could not. She burst onto the main road, her lungs burning, her vision blurring. Streetlights glowed overhead, their light cutting through the darkness. She spun around, expecting something, someone. But there was nothing. The street was empty. Her chest heaved as she clutched her wrist, her skin tingling where she had been touched. She rubbed at the spot, half expecting to see a bruise, a mark, anything. But there was nothing. No proof. Her apartment was only a block away. She forced herself to move, her legs shaky beneath her. Every shadow along the sidewalk felt wrong. Every darkened doorway, a hiding place. By the time she reached her building, her hands were trembling so badly she struggled to fit the key into the lock. When she finally pushed inside, she slammed the door shut, locking it. Silence. She stood there, her breath ragged, her ears straining for any sound beyond the deafening thud of her heartbeat. Minutes passed, then an hour. Eventually, exhaustion won. It was in her head. That was what she told herself. The mind played cruel tricks in the dark. That was all. She turned off her bedroom light, and then a whisper from the corner of the room. Do not run. This is very creepy. Alone travel at night horror story number 2. The night air was sharp against Arliana's skin as she stepped off the last bus of the evening. She barely noticed the cold, though. Something else had settled into her chest. A tight, uneasy feeling. The street was too quiet. No distant hum of cars. No muffled voices from passing houses. Not even the rustling of leaves. Just silence. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, her breath visible in the freezing air. She was only a few blocks from home, 10 minutes at most. That was nothing. But tonight, something felt different. Her boots clicked softly against the pavement as she walked. The sound echoed, too loud in the empty street. She glanced down at her phone. 3% battery left. Great. She swallowed hard. Just keep walking. The sidewalk stretched ahead, lined with bare trees. Their twisted branches swayed gently, casting long, claw-like shadows across the ground. She exhaled sharply, forcing herself to focus. It was just a normal walk home. Then, a sound, a faint rustling. She stopped. Her heart pounded as she slowly turned her head. Nothing. The street was empty. The wind stirred the trees, whispering through the branches. She let out a shaky breath. Just the wind. She started walking again, faster this time. Then, a footstep. Software just behind her. She froze. The sound stopped. Her breath hitched. She could feel something. Someone. Watching. Her hands clenched into fists. Do not turn around, do not look. Just keep moving. She forced her legs to move, but now every step felt heavier. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. Another footstep. Closer. Her breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. The sound. It matched her own. When she quickened her pace, so did it. When she slowed, it followed. Her skin prickled with cold terror. She had to look. She turned her head, just a quick glance over her shoulder. Nothing. The street was empty. Her pulse hammered. No, she was not imagining this. A whisper drifted through the silence, software almost playful. Arliana. She stopped breathing. Her body locked up, her throat tightening around a scream that refused to come out. No, she had imagined that. But the air behind her, it felt wrong. Heavy. Thick. Like someone was standing there, right behind her. She spun around. Nothing. The streetlights flickered. The trees swayed. The cold wind brushed against her skin. She swallowed back the rising panic. Just a few more blocks. If she could just get home. The footsteps came again. Running. Straight toward her. Her breath caught in her throat. She did not think. She just ran. Her boots slammed against the pavement. Her lungs burned. The houses blurred past her, dark and lifeless. Almost there. Almost. Her keys. She fumbled in her pocket, hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped them. The footsteps. Closer now. Too close. She reached her front door, shoved the key into the lock. Her fingers slipped. The metal scraped against the wood. Come on. Come on. Click. She threw herself inside, slammed the door shut, and twisted the lock. Silence. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. Slowly, she pressed her ear to the door. Nothing. No footsteps. No whispering. But the feeling, that awful, suffocating presence. It was still there. Her phone vibrated in her hand. She nearly dropped it. A message. Unknown number. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the screen. Do you think locking the door will keep me out? The blood in her veins turned to ice. Her eyes darted toward the darkened hallway behind her. The air in the room shifted. Something was in here, with her, waiting, watching. And it was not outside. It was already inside. This is most scary. Alone travel at night horror story number 3. The highway stretched endlessly before Jovi, a dark ribbon of asphalt cutting through the dense forest. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the road was the only sound filling the silence of the night. Jovi had never liked driving alone at night, but she had no other choice. Her business trip had run longer than expected, and she had opted for the highway instead of the winding back roads. It was supposed to be the safer route. Yet, as the clock ticked past midnight, unease settled deep in her chest. The radio crackled with static before cutting out completely, leaving an eerie hush inside the car. The sudden silence made her throat tighten. She reached for the dial, turning it slowly, but no station would tune in, just dead air. With a frustrated sigh, she gave up and refocused on the road. The towering trees on either side seemed taller now, their silhouettes stretching unnaturally against the night sky. It almost felt like they were closing in. A flicker of movement at the edge of her vision made her heart stutter. A dark figure stood at the roadside, barely visible in the weak glow of her headlights. It was too far to make out details, but something about the way it stood, so still, so rigid, sent a sharp chill down her spine. She pressed her foot on the accelerator, willing the car to move faster. The figure disappeared in her rearview mirror, swallowed by darkness. A few miles later, the road curved sharply. As she rounded the bend, her breath caught in her throat. Another figure stood at the roadside, identical to the first, dark, still, featureless. Jovi's pulse pounded in her ears. It was impossible. She had been driving too fast for anyone to keep up on foot, yet there it was again. Her rational mind struggled for an explanation. A hitchhiker? A trick of the light? But deep inside, she knew neither was true. Her hands tightened on the wheel. Do not stop. Do not look. Just keep driving. Minutes passed. Miles passed. Just as she began to convince herself it had been nothing, her headlights caught something ahead. Her breath turned to ice. The same figure stood in the middle of the road. Jovi slammed her foot on the brakes. Tires screeched against the asphalt. The car skidded to a halt mere feet from the shadowy form. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she stared, waiting for it to move, to react, to do something. But it did not. The silence was suffocating. The figure loomed, its form blending into the night, featureless yet undeniably solid. It was not human. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to get away. With a trembling hand, she shifted into reverse, her eyes locked on the figure. The moment she moved, it took a step forward. Panic surged through her veins. She reversed faster, her heart hammering, but the figure kept pace. Then, without warning, it vanished. One blink, and it was gone. Her breath hitched. She did not dare hesitate. She slammed the car into drive and sped forward, gripping the wheel so tightly her hands ached. The highway stretched on, endless and empty. A sick feeling curled deep in her stomach. Something was wrong with this road. Something was wrong with this night. Then she saw it again. The figure was running alongside her car. A strangled gasp escaped her lips as she floored the gas pedal. The speedometer climbed, but it did not matter. The figure matched her pace effortlessly. It did not run. It glided, its movement unnatural, inhuman. She could not breathe. The car swerved as her hands trembled. She refused to look directly at it, but she could feel it. It was there, watching her, closing in. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it veered off into the trees and disappeared. Jovi did not slow down. Her fingers ached from gripping the wheel. The road signs blurred past, but she knew she was nearing an exit. A town, civilization, safety. The highway ended in a single lane leading into town. Streetlights flickered in the distance, their warm glow a beacon of hope. She did not stop until she reached a brightly lit gas station. The car lurched to a halt, and she sat there, chest rising and falling in frantic breaths. Slowly, her mind tried to process what had happened. Had she imagined it? Could exhaustion play cruel tricks on her? A knock on the window nearly made her heart stop. A gas station attendant stood outside, concern etched into his face. Jovi rolled the window down only slightly. Are you all right, miss? You look like you have seen a ghost. She let out a shaky breath. I think I might have. The man frowned and glanced toward the highway. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. You are not the first. Jovi's stomach dropped. He gestured toward the store. Come inside. Let me get you some coffee. You do not want to be out here too long. She hesitated but nodded, stepping out of the car. The fluorescent lights of the gas station felt painfully bright after the darkness of the road. As she sipped the warm coffee, the attendant leaned against the counter. People have seen things on that stretch of highway for years. Figures standing by the roadside, appearing ahead, running alongside cars. Some say it is an old legend, but I believe there is truth to it. Jovi swallowed hard. What happens if you stop? The man's face darkened. No one who stops ever makes it back. Her blood ran cold. Jovi never drove alone at night again, and she never took that highway again.